Welcome to another segment of LeaderLINK, linking members with mentors to learn, achieve, and succeed. I am Hunter Sparrow, and I have the pleasure of serving as your Northwest Region Vice President this year. I am excited to announce today we have the second place winner of Introduction to Public Speaking at NLC in Atlanta. From Stanwood FBLA, we have Brooke Berry, joining us to discuss her tips for all public speaking events. But before we start diving deep in that topic, can you tell us a little about yourself and why you joined FBLA?
Yeah, so my name's Brooke Berry. I'm from Stanwood High School. This is my second year of being a member, as well as my first year of being a chapter officer. Last year, I came up as a freshman just because a lot of my friends were doing it, and I thought it'd be really fun to try something new. And so I ended up making it to state. I was really excited. I just was excited to be there. I didn't really think of anything when I wrote my speech of taking it to nationals. But then I eventually just realized that what I had to say in that speech was something I just wanted to take so much farther. And so I ended up finding myself at nationals, and it was just a crazy experience. And then I made it on stage, and it was just a life-changing moment that I never thought would happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our next question, what sparked your original interest in like the public speaking category?
Well, I was playing football at the time, which is a male dominated sport. So as a woman, I had been treated differently and my voice had been looked down on. And so knowing the person I am, I don't really like getting told or like shoved in a box of what I can't do just because of my gender. And so when they were telling me I couldn't do something or that because of my gender, I was weaker or unable to do it, it made me so mad. And so I just wanted my voice to get heard to show that there was a problem that people weren't seeing, and that if nobody was going to bring awareness to it, that I need to do it myself and that I need to get my voice heard. And so that kind of led to me joining public speaking just so I can get my voice out there to tell others what I had to hear. And I just came with great reward with it. And I was super blessed in the moment that my speech, even though I was just doing it to be able to have people hear it, ended up placing. And that was just a wild opportunity for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for viewers watching this right now, for context, the topic for intro public speaking at last year's national competition was what were you most concerned for the future? So Brooke wrote hers on Brooke, you can explain it, but
It was on how at the time I was one of the only female football players on the high school football team, and that being a girl on the football team, I was treated differently. And so I really hated how in today's culture and society that we say that women are equal to men, but the way I was being treated wasn't equal to a guy. And so it kind of brought up the whole thing of women's rights and things in the news that were getting overturned. And it just made me trying to bring the concern to the future that if we're saying this is equal now, what is it going to look like in the future and 10 years from now when there's more things being taken away from us as a woman?
yeah, absolutely. So moving forward on like from why you chose it, what was for the competitive event, what should members be prepared for and how much is like the time/work commitment that goes into like the planning and preparing?
I would definitely say by regionals to have at least 10 hours. And I know that's a lot, but I think by the time I went to nationals, I had over 100 hours of writing and speaking. And public speaking is one of those events where it's going to take up most of your time because you're going to find yourself in front of the mirror. You're going to be talking and talking, and 1 hour is going to turn to 2 hours. And it's just the constant correction of fixing your time. And I mean, if you can find a correction and it sticks in your brain like that, great. Then you're not going to have to spend so much time on it. But if you really want to do good in the event, it's about spending time to make sure you have it memorized. Make sure that every word you can pronounce clearly, making sure you're using big words that stick in people's minds, but not so big that you're not able to say it without slurring it. And it's just you have to have that constant repetition of just practicing it over and over until you get it perfect. And if that takes 50 hours to 100 hours, it really depends on the person.
Yeah, absolutely. Public speaking is kind of like, at least with my experience with it, it's kind of like writing a sheet of music for like a concert. You have to practice like the articulations and like when you need to take breaths and when you need to do that. So it's like very similar to like reading sheet music or something like that. So it does take a lot of planning and preparation. So kind of moving into our next question, what goes into like planning a speech and how did you prepare and plan it?
Yeah, so to start with my speech, I break down the topic and I'll read it over at least 10 times, just fully understand what the topic is. And then I'll take like a blank piece of paper and I'll just start jotting down every little idea I have. I'll go on my computer and I'll start looking up certain things and find articles or quotes I want to use. And I'll just kind of doodle board it where I have a bunch of little things. And then I take my personal stories and I'll add a bunch of those little things in, so then when I'm writing my speech, I can look down at the paper and be like, yeah, I'm going to use that part. And then if I decide I don't want to have the others, I'll just scratch them out. And it's just really pulling all the information and then figuring out where in your speech you want it and if you have time for it. But it's definitely one of those things where it's you can't really go figure out as you go. It's you figure out a little part at once and then you take it all and put it into the massive speech.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of answered this a little bit in your previous question, but kind of what goes into like the planning of a speech? Like what are kind of like the layers that go into like writing one?
Yeah. So you start with your introduction, which I like to make it kind of bold because that's how you're going to grab your judge's attention, is having something that not a lot of people are going to have there, is either having like a bold statement. I mean, if you ever heard in a Harvard essay where it's, I don't like the letter S, that's not a very common thing. And so that's going to bring a reader in or bring a judge into paying attention to you. So I'd say your top part is definitely your hook. That's where you're going to bring them in. But then you also get graded on having it right off the bat where your subject is. And I think that works best when you flow it with that grab, because then the judges are like, okay, I'm interested. And then she's already into her speech. And then I like to start off with some type of information or either just going straight into your personal story and then blending that into your supporting body paragraphs. And your personal story doesn't have to be this massive thing. Mine last year was, but it's because it flowed into the rest of my speech. But having some type of then story and then having it back up the rest of your topic as you go down, adding quotes, adding articles, or even just listing certain events that happen is your supporting information. And it sounds really good when you add it in. And then to your conclusion, you kind of just want to wrap it all up, even if you have to say in conclusion or overall, blah, blah, blah. It's really just wrapping it up in the end and then restating every point you've had, but blending it all together. And then to go out, I always like to add a nice little quote because it kind of just, it's like a little cherry on the top of the sundae. It's just adding the extra flavor to the ending of your speech.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also important for like viewers interested in like doing this event. I think that's also really important why a lot of people say to get it reviewed by like an English teacher or by like a teacher in general, because since they do that a lot, especially English teachers, they'll know like how to put it all together kind of into a structure that works very well. So definitely reach out to your English teachers or just your teacher and advisor in general and have them go through it and just read through it. So I feel like that's also important for you guys to know. Again, you kind of answered this in like your last question, a little bit, but how do you make the judges remember you? Like, what is your personal kind of flair? I kind of know you answered that kind of in the beginning with like the hook. So can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
So, yeah, you grab them with the hook. Another big thing that I learned was being different than everybody else. And I know with my speech this year, I definitely struggled with how can I be different when talking about cyber crimes. And it really takes going down the path that most people aren't going to go down. There's a certain path that majority of people are going to go this way, and you've got to go the part that might be risky, but at the end, it's going to be a greater reward. So talking about controversial things, I talked about Roe v. Wade in my speech last year. That's a very controversial subject, and I didn't know how comfortable I felt presenting it in front of people, but it ended up leading into a great reward, even though I took that risk. So it's just going down the path people are not willing to take will definitely make you stand out. I'd also say having not so much of a basic outfit, but keeping it in the FBLA dress code. I know last year I wore a blue suit, and most people in public speaking tend to wear black or they'll wear some type of dress. And so I thought wearing blue would really make me stand out. And it was actually a psychological thing where my speech was very aggressive. It was very loud. And so you already had my attention when I was talking. But then when I wore blue, which is a very relaxing color on the mind, it kind of confused the judges, like, what is going on here? And even they couldn't tell that psychologically, they didn't know what was going on, which made them remember me. And so it's just finding like those little things, like how are judges going to remember you? Well, if everybody's wearing one color and you come in there wearing a different color, judges might remember that. Or if you come deliver a speech that's completely different from what everybody else is doing, but on the same topic of them, they're going to remember that. I also like to do jumping jacks in my speech last year because if the judges zone out, doing some type of big movement is definitely going to draw them back in and make them remember you. So if you're doing intro to public speaking, it's such a broad topic where you could be doing push-ups if you needed to. You could do jumping jacks. You could get down on the floor and doing crunches. It's one of those things where your personal story, you can take it to another level, and that's where your judges are going to remember you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on a really good thing of kind of making the judges feel like they're in the scenario
Right.
and they're in your shoes next to you while you were experiencing or telling this story. So I think that's an important thing to remember when you guys are like formulating your speeches or your presentation. Moving on to our next question, Brooke, what are your tips for giving a speech in front of an audience? As I know this event is open in finals, isn't open to an audience event in the final round, but also to judges as well.
Well, one of those things where people always say that public speakers don't get nervous, that's a complete lie. Most people get nervous before going in. And so my biggest advice is really just sit back, take a breath before you go in there. Cause once you see how many people are in there, you're going to start racing more. But if you just kind of shut out the people that are there and just focus on the judges, it really calms your nerves. And I know for me, what really worked was just having a message that it didn't matter who was in the room. It didn't matter if it was the judges, if it was 1,000 people, if it was the whole entire world watching. It was a speech that I was comfortable giving. And I'd practice it so many times that even if I was under pressure, I knew I wasn't going to mess up because it was locked in my mind. And also just making a speech that you want people to hear. Don't be writing a speech where you're reading off a piece of paper in your head, but giving a speech where when you deliver it, it's moving through you. You're living out your speech and you're not just reading it off of a script. It's one of those things where you just have to make it so personal to you that everybody in the room disappears when you give it. And it's just you and your judges, and they're listening to what you have to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like really important topics you brought up. Definitely out of my experience presenting and presentation events, um, make sure you add, as we talked about earlier, your personal flair. Make sure there's something that judges can remember you by, whether it's a color or whether it's something you did during your presentation, like jumping jacks, for example, like Brooke said. That's really important to kind of get judges like in your mind, like, oh, I remember her and she was really, really good, or I remember him, he was really good, I remember them. Like, just make sure it's something that makes you stand out and different from other competitors. So, Brooke, lastly, for fun, as our last question, what is your favorite food and why?
I would have to go with cinnamon rolls with like a strawberry on top. There's just something about like a good warm cinnamon roll that it just like makes your heart feel good. And it's just I love cinnamon rolls. They're so good.
I cannot agree more. But like another question on top of that, homemade cinnamon rolls or Cinnabon store-bought, what's kind of your
Oh, 100%. My work, we make the best cinnamon rolls. So good. Shout out to Stanwood Cupcakes because better than Cinnabon. They are so good. So absolutely homemade.
Yes, absolutely. So, in conclusion, thank you so much, Brooke, for joining me for this interview. Washington, we can't wait to see you next time on LeaderLink. Make sure to follow at Washington FBLA or WAFBLA on Instagram to stay connected on all of our segments. Thanks for watching.